Hi class, I hope you are well. This is Dr. Brace, and this is a quick lecture to talk about creating health education materials. So the first thing you want to consider when creating materials is your audience. You need to tailor your materials to your audience or priority population. What you would create for a child would be very different than what you would create for medical professionals that you might be trying to educate on a specific topic versus the general public. So one thing to consider when working with the general public is health literacy. And research has indicated that approximately 1/3 of US adults have trouble reading and acting on health information. So health literacy is one of the concepts you need to consider. Additionally, in the United States, the average reading level among adults is around 5th grade. So if you're creating something for the general population, you need to consider both their health literacy and then also just their general literacy. You want to create materials that are accessible to anybody that would be in your specific population. If it's something, say, for graduate students, then your readability level can be higher than if it's something for elementary students or the general population. And we'll talk about readability in a moment. So you also, when you are creating your communication, it needs to be clear, and you need to determine what your key message is and then test that with your intended audience. So you'll want to find people that are representative of your intended audience or priority population and have them look through your proposed materials and ask them questions. Do you say things like clinic or doctor's office and use what that population, the terminology they use? Do they have specific foods or specific concepts in their culture that you would need to include in the communication if you're talking about nutrition? So think about things like that and then test that with your intended audience. You want to determine the best way to communicate your message to your audience. So is a newspaper print going to be received by teenagers in the US? Is a text message appropriate for elementary school students or older adults? So what is the best way to get this messaging out, or how you're going to communicate that? And then how are you going to distribute the materials? Is it an email? Is it a handout at the end of your educational session? Is it through a PowerPoint presentation that you're going to share during the session? So you'll think about all of these different things when deciding what is the material you're going to create, and then how you're going to tailor that to your specific audience or priority population. So when you are thinking through your message, you want to make sure that it's clear. You want to provide the most important information first. So tell them why it's important, and then tell them what actions they can take related to that information. You want to limit the number of messages that you're providing so that they are not overwhelmed. You want to tell them what they need to do and what actions they need to take. So if you're trying to work with your population on hand hygiene, you might provide a message that's clear and simple and it's pointed, that says always wash your hands with soap and warm water for 20 seconds before and after handling food. Food and water can carry germs that make you and your family sick. So you're telling them what to do. It's a very simple message, and you're telling them why it's important and what action they need to take. You also need to explain what they will gain from understanding this information, and then you want to choose your words carefully. So be clear and concise. Don't use jargon. So say something like high blood pressure instead of hypertension. Say heart disease instead of cardiovascular disease, if those are within your topic that you're discussing. Talk to them or provide a message like you would be talking to your friends. So keep it simple. Use a tone that encourages your audience, and make sure you're avoiding abbreviations. Limit your use of statistics and limit your use of symbols in your messaging. And I'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. You want to consider, if this is written materials, the type of text or what the writing will be in your materials. So if it's something that you're handing out to them, use a font that's between 12 and 14 point. So that's generally the font you would see on, say, a paper that you are developing for a class. 14 points might be a little bit large, but tailor it to who your audience is. If you're working with older adults or people who might have vision impairments, you're going to want a larger font. You want to use easy to read fonts. So think of things like Times New Roman or Calibri. Those are most commonly used, and those are easy to read fonts. You want to avoid using all capital letters. That will be overwhelming. It may feel like you're yelling at your audience, so that can be off-putting. You also want to avoid fancy fonts like the one that's illustrated on the word fancy. Those are more difficult to read, so stick with the very simple fonts to use. If you need to emphasize something, use bold on the font to emphasize a specific word or phrase, and avoid using italics or underlining, as italics and underlining are more difficult to read. You also want to focus on using dark letters on a light background. It's hard to see a dark background with light letters. If you do want to use something other than a white background or a light background, make sure that there's contrast. So don't pick like a light blue with a light blue font with a dark blue background. Try to vary that up. And then also consider things like people who might have color blindness, specifically red-green colorblind. Avoid colors that are red or green, because if someone who has color blindness sees that, they're just going to see it as shades of gray, and they might lose some of the intent of what you're trying to convey in your health messaging. You also want to test for readability, and I'm only going to just touch on this here because there's a video available in this module for you to walk step by step on how to set up the Flesch-Kincaid readability assessment in your Microsoft Word program so that you can look at what is the readability of a document. It will give you a score that'll tell you that this is for the 5th grade reading level, this is for 8th grade, this is for 16th grade, which is graduate school. And then you can look at that, consider your audience, and then make changes to the text to reduce that readability to best fit the needs of your audience. You'll want to use visuals to help your tell your story, and you want to make sure that you're choosing appropriate visuals for your materials. If you're using photos, they're best for illustrating life events. They tend to be more compelling. You want to make sure that if you're using photos that they're culturally appropriate. So if you're working with a specific population, ensure that those photos are representative of that population. You also can use illustrations, which they can help identify or demonstrate an idea or procedure. You can use cartoons, and those can set more of a casual tone. Whatever visual you're using, they should help communicate your message, and they can help show the actions you want your audience to take. So use promoting visuals in your document, not avoidance materials. So if you're trying to get someone to improve fruit and vegetable consumption, show fruits and vegetables on the document. Don't show the foods they should avoid. Want to make sure again that they're culturally relevant and sensitive, and you want to make sure that they're easy to understand. So present one message per visual, and if you show more than one message at a time in a visual, it can result in your audience missing some or all of the messages. And then the entire intent of what you created is out the window. You want to include captions if you have images that can help have that visual or that written component so that people can read the caption and understand what your intent was with that message, so you can just clarify any issues. And you can add in things like arrows to help point out key information. Also, make sure you use high quality visuals so they're not distorted when they're moved across different platforms, like going from a flyer to a website to a PowerPoint. And so they're not blurry or anything like that. PowerPoints are one other type of written visual that you can create that it's similar to what you can hand out, but there's going to be less content on the slide because the intent of a PowerPoint is usually to accompany a presentation. And it is not meant to have all of the information on the slide for the participant to read. It's more of a guide of what's going to be discussed, and you want them to pay attention to you, the presenter. It should enhance your presentation. It should not be what you read to the audience. If you're just reading something, chances are you're going to lose your audience, and then the intent of your communication is lost. So when you're developing your PowerPoint, you're going to have, again, the text, and you want to use those same considerations we discussed with creating a flyer or a handout with written materials. You want to consider your purpose. What are you trying to do? What's your occasion? Who your audience is? All of that. You want to consider images using the same parameters we've just recently discussed. And then you can also use figures, graphs, and tables to clarify a point. You want to keep it simple, and you can do this by choosing a single background for the entire presentation or a theme, and Office has good options that you can choose from, but choose the more simple ones. Use your simple and clear fonts. Use a font that can be seen from the back of the room and try to stay above 24-point font. You want to write this in bulleted format like you can see on the screen, and only provide essential information. You'll use keywords on the slide to discuss concepts with your participants, not to have them read. You want to have white space around the slide so that it's not overwhelming to your participants. And you want to make sure that each slide logically leads to the next. You don't want a cluttered slide. You don't want to use complicated fonts. You don't want to have extraneous information that's unnecessary. Don't use images that can be distracting. And don't use hard to read color combinations like I had already mentioned. One helpful rule to think of when developing a PowerPoint is the 5-5-5 rule, and that's simply having no more than 5 points on a slide with no more than 5 words per point, and keeping it shorter to the amount of letters in a word. So this is close to the 5-5-5. We've got 5 main points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We almost have 5 words across, and then we've got some simple, concise language. So these are some tips for you to consider when you're developing health communication materials for your audience. Always remember, consider your audience first and how they'll best receive that information. Please post any questions you have to Canvas and I will answer them there. Thank you.